welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. The Democratic convention is now over, but one speech by Kaiser Khan, the father of a soldier killed in Iraq, has set in motion what might be the gravest crisis of the Trump campaign.
Donald Trump, you're asking Americans to trust you with their future. Let me ask you, have you even read the United States Constitution? I will gladly lend you my copy.
Now, one might think a person running for president would refrain from criticizing a Gold Star family who had lost their son, Army Captain Humayun Khan, to a suicide bomber in Baghdad, a son awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, but one would be wrong.
Looked like a nice guy to me. His wife, if you look at his wife, she was standing there. She had nothing to say. Maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say, you tell me, but plenty of people have written that. She was extremely quiet, and it looked like she had nothing to say. A lot of people have said that.
Note that Donald Trump implied that Gold Star mother Ghazala Khan did not speak because her religion would not allow it. In fact, she feared breaking down crying, but spoke to the press many times afterwards about how she had beseeched her son not to be a hero and to come home safe. Trump went on to equate his own hard work in business with their sacrifices in war, and in his defense tweeted that Khan's father had viciously attacked him. Trump was criticized by GOP leaders, including Republican Senator John McCain, but that war hero did not withdraw his endorsement. Neither did Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell nor House Speaker Paul Ryan, both of whom denounced Trump's words, though without mentioning his name. Now, despite maintaining their support, Trump refused, at least for now, to back Ryan or McCain in their primary races. This reportedly enraged party leaders. But President Obama said the GOP condemnations of Trump ring hollow.
And the question I think that they have to ask themselves is, if you are repeatedly having to say in very strong terms that what he has said is unacceptable, why are you still endorsing him?
A couple of prominent Republicans have defected. Representative Richard Hanna of New York and Silicon Valley billionaire Meg Whitman, who ran for governor in California, you may remember. The Hewlett-Packard CEO has long opposed Trump, but now vows to raise money for Hillary Clinton and to vote for her. But will others follow? And where do the candidates stand right now with fewer than 100 days to the finish line? Yes, time for the horse race. Too soon to know the full effect of the Khan controversy, but the polls do suggest Hillary Clinton earned twice the bounce from her convention that Donald Trump did from his. The numbers crunched over at 538.com think her bounce was about 7 points. And since the candidates were essentially tied before the GOP convention, that means Hillary's lead is now 7 points. Further, 538 projects Clinton's lead to settle in at that 7, give or take a couple of points, probably all the way to November. But do those numbers mean much with 3 months to go? Let's dig deeper into the electorate and hear where voters actually stand on some issues. Expect some surprises. Joining us, economist at Microsoft Research, the author of the website PredictWise, David Rothschild, who, by the way, correctly predicted 50 of 51 electoral college outcomes in 2012, long before the election, 51 because it includes D.C. He has doubts about these bounce numbers. And with us as well from Washington, D.C., Dante Cini, a data analyst for the Wall Street Journal and director of the American Communities Project that studies American politics and culture. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
So, David, why do you have doubts about these convention bounce numbers?
So when we look at the convention, every year you see numbers go up, numbers go down, And we did take a long look to see, well, what's behind that. And one of the things we see is that the people who answer the polls are subtly different before, during, and after the convention. Democrats, a little less likely to respond to polls right after the Republican convention, and Republicans, a little less likely to respond to polls after the Democratic convention. And so a lot of what drives these bounces is not people changing their sentiment or changing their support, but just the breakdown of who is answering that poll that really doesn't make any sort of difference in who a likely voter is going to be come election day. That being said, what you do see when you see change in sentiment is not people switching from Trump to Clinton or Clinton to Trump. It is people sliding from neither or I don't know into their own candidates. For instance, you see in the CNN poll that Clinton went from Democratic supporters to, I think it was 85% of Democratic supporters, to 87% of Democratic supporters, to about 94% of Democratic supporters before, in the middle, and then after the DNC. And so that's really what's driving a lot of the movement is, number one, just a kind of shift in who responds and doesn't respond to polls, which is kind of unmeaningless on election day. And number two is a little bit about people just lining up behind their party's candidate.
So, Dante, I know, because we've spoken many times, that your expertise is in measuring voters county by county at that granular a level across the United States, not just the red state and blue state generalizations that the press usually talks about. I wonder if you see it differently in general this year with respect to Trump versus other historical Republican candidates. Are the kinds of counties or the kinds of people within counties who seem to be leaning for Trump different from, say, a Romney or a McCain or a George W. Bush?
Well, there is this interesting divide within the GOP that's really about the ex-urban Republicans who are kind of better educated and wealthier and kind of the edge of the suburbs, and rural Republicans who tend to have less money. They're less really a part of the urban economy. And they've both supported Republicans in the past. There are some signs now, looking at the data that I get from the NBC Wall Street Journal poll and breaking it down at the county level, that what we're starting to see is the urban-suburban break between the urban-suburban kind of Democratic hold and then the ex-urban rural kind of part of that it's Republican. That divide is growing steeper. And I think one thing that's happened is these Republicans that are kind of somewhat moderate Republicans in big cities and dense kind of urban-suburban places are having a hard time getting behind Donald Trump, and rural places are strongly behind him. But the other thing that I'm seeing in the polling data, and then I saw during the conventions, what I did was I was driving around Ohio and Pennsylvania and going to specific places that I thought would be interesting to look at the vote. And these places, these ex-urban places in particular, aren't really sure what to make of Trump yet. And I went to Delaware County, which was very reliably Republican. I went for Romney by 30 points in 2012. Look, it's going to go Republican again. But talking to voters around there and looking at what I'm seeing in the polls, maybe instead of 30 points, it's 25 points, it's 20 points. That's big, because those are big caches, really, of votes for the GOP. And if
Right.
Trump's having a hard time connecting there, it's a problem.
And so it's a matter of margins, right, David? It's not that, let's say, African Americans are going to suddenly vote in a majority for a Republican anytime soon, but if they get more than the, 5 or 10% that they got when Obama was running, then it would help them in those states where there are a lot of black voters. And so the opposite would be true with respect to these excerpts. If they're going to go 25% instead of 30% for the Republican candidate like Dante's describing, that can really make a difference, especially if the suburbs and the cities really hold strong for the Democrat.
Look, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is you see all of the Republican leaders either showing strong support or wavering, or some have even, said that they may support no candidate, et cetera. But you still see very high numbers of Republican supporters. Local differences aside, you're still seeing high 80s in poll after poll of the number of Republican supporters that are supporting Trump. Now, of course, what this means...
So this whole, let me jump in, because this whole media narrative and what President Obama is now trying to sell, that Trump is not a normal candidate. This is not a Mitt Romney, a George W. Bush, a John McCain. This is a uniquely threatening demagogue. and some of the defections, at least in rhetoric, that we see from the Republican politicians. That is not landing, as far as you can tell, in rank and file Republican America?
Now, to what Dante's saying, it may be happening in very small segments of the population, and it definitely will. And there's a very small segment of the population that will swing in any given election. But overall numbers, Trump is still doing very, very strong. And I think it comes down to where is he on the issues compared to the average Republican voter. And to be frank, he is not that different than previous candidates. And he's actually maybe even more representative of the voters, because some of the things that he has broken away from, let's say immigration and trade, are actually things that are popular among the Republican electorate. These are things which our representative government was working in a sense where the Republicans were going against their party to do something they felt was right. Yeah. Most economists, myself included, believe that free trade is really important, that you need immigrants in order to fill out the labor force. But they've never been popular among the rank and file. And so this has actually just made him very popular because he's hitting the issues.
Dante, do I see a skeptical face?
I'm frankly, yeah. It's, the thing that's different in the polling numbers this time overall is that Trump is not winning college-educated white voters, and that's consistent now. That's been consistent in poll after poll after poll. Now, in the latest CNN poll, the number was really remarkable. It was a 10-point. Clinton led those voters by 10 points. That's a lot. But look, in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, the last one just before the election in 2012, Romney was winning those voters by 12 points. Look, it's not really possible for Trump to win if he's losing college-educated whites by 10 points. It's probably not possible for him if he's losing them at all. And I think that where I'm starting to see it, that's what the big numbers say. And then when I break it into the types that I look at, where's that playing out? Well, I think he's losing support in. There are still Republicans who are wealthy who believe in free trade and things like this, and that they're being turned off by what he's saying. And they're college-educated voters in urban suburbs, exurbs. That's a problem for him.
We're going to put up a chart that shows where voters are on some issues. And a bit of this is going to be really counterintuitive. Let's take a look. Free trade is one of the big things that you both mentioned. Now, this poll, David, this chart, David, maybe you can describe it, is sort of the opposite of what it looks like. The higher the peak, the less interested somebody is in the particular issue. You familiar with this?
Yeah, so we created this working with Pollfish, and we've been polling people every single week on a series of 12 issues. And we've just kind of been stringing it out from very strong support to very strong support, where generally on the left you're looking at Democratic positions and on the right you're looking at Republican positions. And what we were trying to see is the variation in indifference and strong support over time and across any given time period. And what you see with the big peak in the middle means most people simply don't care about trade. They are indifferent. They are neither favor nor oppose free trade. But what you see by the strong support on the left, relatively strong support on the right, is that people who do care, they don't like it. And that is not to say that there aren't some people who have very strong support for free trade, but that is a very small percentage of the population. It may be a powerful percentage. It may be people who are highly educated and have a lot of money and are key donor classes. Mm-hmm. But for the average American voter, if they care about it, which is not that many people, they generally are against it. Now, other topics, of course,
a lot of blue-collar workers who feel that their jobs have been shipped overseas, who've been in the media for feeling very strongly about it, both for Trump and for Bernie Sanders. There just aren't that many of them.
The short of it is that if you have saliency about trade, you are probably someone on the losing end. Most Americans are on the winning end of trade, but they don't realize it. They're on the winning end because their groceries are slightly cheaper. Their goods they buy are slightly cheaper. Their job is slightly more productive. But they don't realize it as much as those people who are on the losing end, because those people on the losing end really got hit hard by losing a job.
Is any one of these lines barring Muslims from the United States? Did you test it?
We've been not testing that question because we didn't know that would be a question in January when we started going on. We have been looking at this question about immigrants and whether or not there should be more or less immigrants in the country. And this is consistent across Democrats and Republicans. There is no love for immigration. Most people want to limit the amount of immigrants or even cut back on the amount of immigrants that are currently here. And so even though this is something that has now become a partisan divide, this again is something where Trump is hitting a chord with Democratic and Republican voters alike who generally are not in favor of immigration.
Dante, does this all make sense to you?
I mean, to some extent, I do think that the reason why trade and things don't show up as an issue people care about, particularly, I think it's an excellent point. Winners in trade don't care about trade because that's just the way things are. The thing to keep in mind is the reason why I think Trump is struggling with college-educated voters isn't really any specific issue per se. It is the idea that the system doesn't work. We need to junk the system. We have some real problems with the system. This is Trump's message. And there are people in America, particularly white working class voters, for whom that message resonates. But if there are a lot of places, the Republican Party in particular, used to be the party of economic winners. That was the whole point of the Republican Party. That's what it was to be a country club Republican, right? There are still a lot of those people out there. And the idea of junking the system to them, or let's throw the system overboard, it's not at the specific issue level. It's at the bigger idea of, I don't really want dramatic change. This idea that everything is awful in America isn't true. Some places it is really not good in America right now. Some places actually things are quite good. And Trump's message resonates with part of the country and doesn't resonate with the other part. And I think that that's a problem. That divide runs through the middle of the GOP, and I think that's a real problem for him right now. It definitely runs through the middle of the electorate.
And I guess after the sunny Democratic convention, not that it didn't point out problems, but it was all stronger together and USA, USA, and what do you mean you have to make America great again, compared to Donald Trump's relatively dark, angry convention. Maybe he overshot in the pessimism direction, and maybe the Democrats overshot in the optimism direction, and the result will, to some degree, be a reflection of who came closer.
I think that's right. I think that the real problem that Trump has is, Trump's running a classic populist campaign in some ways, but not completely, because he's leaving off a big part of the group he needs to win, which would be non-white working class voters, minority working class voters, who, look, some of his message resonate with these people, but they're off. Really, he's not going to get them because he's not scoring with them in other ways. These Marist polls just before the conventions, he was getting 0% of the minority vote in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Now, I don't think those numbers were completely accurate.
I saw it. That's of the black vote, and there's still a pretty big split between the black vote, which in the Quinnipiac poll a few weeks earlier was at 1%. So that zero is certainly within the margin of error. But Latinos are polling anywhere from, and I'll ask you this, David, the teens to the 20s to the 30s in a June Quinnipiac poll, which one might think is not credible given how much he's run against Mexicans. But is there a difference that you see in polling, if you're looking at the polls, between blacks and Latinos that's really measurable?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that once you start slicing and dicing polling, the margin of error goes up very fast. Research that we've done looking at the margin of error just on the top line says that the reality is polls are about half as good as they say they are. Essentially, the true 95% range is really about twice as large as the reported range. And so when you start going into any sort of sub-demographics, you're going to have a problem. And I really, to touch on Dante's point, which I agree with strongly, to say, Trump is not losing on the issues. He's losing on the Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump is getting issues that are resonating with a certain segment of the population, and it's definitely a certain segment of the Republican population. But what he's losing on is his unfavorability, but more towards going back to what you're talking about with Obama in the beginning. People are worried, quite frankly, about his loyalty and demagoguery, and these are questions that go well beyond the issues. And it does say on one hand that maybe somebody could win with this populist rhetoric. It's just probably not going to be Donald Trump with his flaws as a human being.
David Rothschild, Dante Cini, thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.
And now we'll bring on some additional evidence. Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Money plays an unusual role this election season. Billionaire mostly funds his own campaign. Highly funded establishment figures with millions of dollars behind them drop like flies, and a near revolution of sorts is led by a candidate who prefers to accept just $27 from everyday citizens. But of course, money in politics remains a central issue. At their convention, many Democrats, including the nominee, railed against the 2010 Citizens United Supreme Court ruling that allows unlimited cash to support political candidates.
That's why we need to appoint Supreme Court justices who will get money out of politics. And if necessary, we will pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United.
But long before Citizens United, big money was already contaminating elections. That's why places like New York, Minnesota, and Arizona enacted public campaign finance systems. Here in New York City, small donations are matched by a higher amount by the government. Would a public finance matching system like that work on a larger scale? Our next guest says it could. He's Michael Malbin, co-founder and executive director of the Campaign Finance Institute. He teaches political science at the University of Albany, and his report on this is entitled Small Donors, Big Democracy, New York City's Matching Funds as a Model for the Nation and States. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here, Brian.
First, for historical background a little bit, you think this is a very important time, not just because of Citizens United, to be talking about this?
It is. This is first election I can remember since Watergate when it's a top-level campaign issue, and with good reason. The role of, let's say, wealthy donors, people who could afford to give $1,000 or more, was always more important than the average citizen. But there's been an explosion since Citizens United. 80 some odd thousand people gave the top quarter of the money in the, let's say, in the odd numbered year before the 2008 presidential election. This time it was 78 people giving $1 million or more, giving the same percentage.
Really
a huge
concentrated.
change. Yes.
Really concentrated. For people who don't know New York City's system, how much matching is there?
In New York City, you get the government kicks in $6 for every dollar that a donor gives up to the first $175.
That's worth repeating. 6 times what the donor
six
gives.
times. So
as long as it's a small donation, up to only $175.
It's the first $175. So if you give more, it's only the first $175 that's matched.
Right. Let's put up a chart that you gave us that shows the difference between city council races,
Sure.
people contributing, compared to state assembly races.
Stay on this one for a little bit.
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
Because we've looked at all 50 states, we've published reports on them all. The normal situation, no public financing, is that about 15% of candidates' money comes from small donors. The rest comes from big donors or from PACs, political action.
So what we're seeing
So
in
that's
this
normal.
map of New York City is sparse little drops of red in most of the places,
Yeah,
meaning small concentrations of their money is coming from small donors.
This shows you where small donors live. And it's very small, granular units, and it's only one donor, right? Most of the city, you can see on that map, that the assembly candidates, not publicly funded, and by the way, this is normal. This is other states too.
Sure.
They don't bother raising money in most of the city. And this is only one donor, and you get red on
By
this
the way,
one.
can I point out the exception to this? On the lower left, that's Staten Island,
That's right.
the most conservative, the only part of New York City that generally votes Republican for things. It looks like a lot of people are giving small contributions
Very
to
small,
candidates there.
And the other concentrations are in Manhattan. They've politicized the Upper West Side,
Yes.
the East Side, financial district.
But that's where the
That's
very
where the money
wealthy,
is. That's also
very
where the
wealthy-
$1,000 donations are. That's right. That's right. But that's your lot of white spots, a lot of nothing going on.
right.
Okay. So then what the city says for city elections is we're going to give the candidates an incentive to go out and to their neighborhoods and raise small contributions, because suddenly $25 is worth 25 times 7.
Right.
It's worth 175. So 75 instead of 25.
And
That's a
so,
big
whoa, it looks like everybody's giving money to
shift.
candidates.
90% of the block groups. A block group is a small unit, geographic unit that the census uses. It has about 1,500 people in it. 90% of them in the city. You have people giving. There's there's no racial disparity. There's no economic disparity between places where candidates raise their money and the whole city as a whole.
And it's not that everybody knows the law and says, oh, I can give money and get matched. It's that the candidates bother to ask.
Yes. Without the candidates asking, most people don't give. It's changed the candidates' behavior. And that's the key. And there's been experimental research that shows it's not spontaneous.
So here's the question. Is it scalable to the nation? Is this a way around Citizens United at the national level if Congress were to have the politics to pass it?
Yeah.
Is this scalable?
So let's be clear about what this does not do. It's not going to drive big money out of politics. This whole idea about let's amend the Constitution to get big money out of politics, not going to. You might amend the Constitution, although that's highly unlikely. But people who have an incentive to participate will. The question is, how can you get the rest of us in? And will it scale? Yes, I think so. But obviously, we're making extrapolations. We've looked at other cities. We've looked at places that have programs like this. New York is the most successful. It's instead of 15% of the money coming from small donors, it's nearly 40. And when you add in the value of the small contributions, it's 2/3.
We just have 30 seconds left. But do you think that if Hillary Clinton is elected president, even with a Republican Congress, that this is the route to campaign finance reform rather than what people will think of first, which is get a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United?
Absolutely. If you have the votes to get 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states, you could change the law
That's a
much
constitutional
more
amendment,
easily.
yeah.
Much more easily. And do I think there's a chance that it could make a difference? Yes, but there's a gap between city councils and national legislature, a big gap.
Thank you very much for joining us. A little ray of hope for people interested in campaign finance reform as a key issue. We really appreciate it. And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.